Welcome back to another episode of Red Tinted Glasses. Your therapy session is well underway, and joining me on this episode is Grant Campbell. And Grant, I think therapy is very much needed after the Dons have crashed out of the Premier Sports Cup.
Yes, it certainly is a massive disappointment, I'm sure. We were calling this on the Sunday a disastrous afternoon for fans of Aberdeen Football Club. I mean, you know, to go out of any competition is massively disappointing. But again, like last season, losing so early on in the League Cup, away from home, having been in front, massively disappointing, Glen.
Massively disappointing indeed, Grant. And Grant, obviously, welcome back to the show, filling in for Calum. Those of you that tuned into the last episode will have known that Calum was supposed to actually be at Starks Park tonight. Unfortunately, didn't make it due to a positive COVID test he picked up this morning, as Grant says, picked up on the Sunday. And, you know, he did that because he did his lateral flow test pre-match after waking up and not feeling great. So, obviously, I wish him a speedy recovery. It's a shame that he's not here with us today, but we knew that. But he might not be well enough to join me again on Thursday night when we'll be playing Qarabag. So Grant, if he is available, will be joining me again. So you might be getting familiar with Grant this season, but Grant, I'm sure you'd pass on your well wishes as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's terrible news to hear of Calum not being great and obviously testing positive for coronavirus. So on behalf of us here at Red Tinted Glasses, we want to wish Calum all the best in a speedy recovery. And I think it's very important, to explain to people watching this that the lateral flow tests are so important. You know, we're trying to move forward to a new normal. We want to experience live football, live events again. And the lateral flow tests just give that extra layer of protection for people to kind of go to enjoy their lives again. Yeah. And, I think it's important that, obviously not great news from Calum's point of view today, but I think it's important that people listening to this that are very, dismissive of the lateral flow test actually kind of wake themselves up a little bit and actually understand that, doing them is for your own benefit and also your friends and family's benefit as well. Yeah,
and I think I really want to, commend Calum for actually having the bravery, I suppose, to do the lateral flow test and not drag himself along to the game today feeling under the weather, because there are many people that probably are out there that will dismiss the lateral flow test as inaccurate. They do give a certain layer of protection. I mean, not full compared to the PCR test, but Calum does. It's a choice. It's not mandatory just now for attending games. So yeah, I just want to commend Calum on actually taking up that choice and doing it and keeping himself safe, but also the rest of the Red Army who travelled down there, because had he gone, we could be looking at a lot more cases. So obviously, if you are feeling under the weather, make sure you are taking those tests. And Calum, we wish you a speedy recovery. But speaking of speedy recovery, Aberdeen are going to need one ahead of Thursday night, Grant, because that definitely didn't go to plan.
Certainly did not. It was a very, very strange performance from Aberdeen this afternoon. I think Stephen Glass used his squad to make changes. I think he made 7 or 8 changes. Probably, in hindsight, maybe 1 or 2 changes too much for a League Cup tie. Almost got our hands burnt last week at Livingston, having, not played particularly well down at the Tony Macaroni, but getting that late winner in such fantastic moment, I'm sure, for the Aberdeen fans at the end with Jack McKenzie's goal. But same situation this week, and it backfired on us. And, it was quite extraordinary, Glen, how a game swung in its head from one 45 minutes to another, because I thought Aberdeen for the first 45 minutes were comfortable in the game. I don't think they were anywhere near their best, but they were comfortable in the game. I thought Raith were a bit nervous at the start, certainly the first 35 minutes of the game. Aberdeen took the lead. I'm sure we'll come on to talk about this. Great goal from J. Emmanuel Thomas. But second half, I don't know what happened at half-time, either in John McGlynn's dressing room or in Stephen Glass's dressing room, or a bit of both. But it looked like the switch had been turned off for Aberdeen, and a light had been flicked on in Raith's mind, because within 2 minutes of the second half, Raith got their goal, the fans got right behind their team, and Aberdeen looked spooked, quite frankly, and never really recovered.
Yeah, and I suppose Calum might not like me picking this up, but he said he was looking forward to giving Christophe Berra abuse. Well, he never managed to get that, and I guess Christophe Berra's got the last laugh. As Patrick Ewan pointed out on our YouTube channel in the comments section, saying that Calum's probably jinxed the game. Well, he jinxed himself and the game, it appears. But just remember, if you are watching on YouTube, to hit that like button and subscribe if you've not already. 9 subscribers away from 600 as we record just now. Again, thank you for the fantastic support for those of you that watch on YouTube, but also those of you that are listening. Over 300 of you follow us on Spotify. And like we touched on previously, over 1,000 listens. So just great support, and hopefully this therapy session will ease some of the anger that the result has created. Grant, you touched on there the 8 changes. Obviously didn't have the same effect that it had at Livingston. Now, I'll openly admit, as Calum's done in the past, I didn't watch the first 45 because I had Rory's swimming lesson. It was his first lesson back after the summer holidays. So unfortunately that took a bit of a precedence. But coming out of the pool with 15 minutes to go of the first half, to see we were 1-0 up, J. Emmanuel Thomas grabbing his first goal for the club, I thought, oh, perfect. Because when I saw that team announced, yes, we'd rung the changes, but it really was a team that should have been capable of beating this Raith Rovers team, again, with no disrespect to those from Kirkcaldy.
No, absolutely, should have been. I mean, you look at that starting 11, Declan Gallagher, Scotland international, still in that back 4 alongside McCrory and Hayes. Dylan McGeoch, a very accomplished midfielder. Jenks, who had a goal last week at Livingston, he'd have been full of confidence.
Just on Jenks, though, yes, he got that goal, but I'm still not seeing it from him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and obviously Ojo, after that wonderful display in Thursday night against Breidablik, keeping his place. And I think it's important. I mean, I tweeted the goal from J. Emmanuel Thomas and coined it to that great song, Jet by Paul McCartney and Wings, because it is a really great song. 1 and 2, it's a really, really good strike. I mean, it's a fantastically pure hit goal. Nothing Jamie McDonald could do. He's just caught it flush, and it's just an absolutely superb strike. But here's the thing, Glenn. That was our only shot on target in the whole 90 minutes. Well, that is massively alarming.
Well, I was actually going to bring that up because I've not seen the goal back yet. But I'll take your word for it because everyone else has commented about how much of a worldie that the goal seemed to be. But 2 points there that I'll pick up on yours, but also a point I'm going to counter for you. Very alarming because I only saw the second half and I don't remember Jamie McDonald having a save to make. So if that was our only shot on target in the first half, did he even have to touch the ball other than picking the ball out the back of the net? But my point to you, Grant, is how much of a confidence boost will getting his first goal for the club be for Jet?
I think it's huge. I think there's been a lot of criticism towards J. Emmanuel Thomas. Some of it fair. Some of it, in my opinion, a bit harsh. I really like Jet. I like his physical presence. I actually think he's a very positive influence in the team. You can clearly see he's well liked by his teammates. I think he's shown flashes of good moments in games so far this season. But I've also seen moments this season where he doesn't do enough for me. Mm-hmm. He got his goal today, but I thought after that I wanted a wee bit more from him. It didn't quite happen for him. And I don't know if that's down to the fact that there was not a lot of support in and around him, or he lacked that other centre forward to work as a partnership alongside. Maybe a bit of both, I don't know. But it was a fantastic moment of brilliance. It almost sort of reminded me, and this is a really poor example to use here, but when Rory Fallon scored that equaliser against Hibs in that semi-final those years ago, an absolute wonder strike. It should have given Aberdeen a real confidence and real belief to go for the jugular, get the second goal, get the third goal, and run away with the game. But it never happened, and it was exactly the same today.
Yeah.
I just don't know to put it down to, though. That was frustrating.
But like I said, obviously not seeing the first half, and I suppose I'll come to you for comment on this, is listening to Willie Miller and Alistair Lamont on BBC Scotland on the drive back. They said that we were in kind of cruise control. Dario Zanata had a half chance where he hit the side netting, and then it was, I think, Riley Simon, you said in the first half he had a good chance, but
Willie Snow had a good chance that Lewis was saved, and then he scuffed his shot, and it was a bit of a scramble. That was early on in the game,
but for
quite well.
But for all the passing, Yeah, but for all the passing football that we seem to be doing, from what I'd heard in the first half, was it disappointing that we only came away with that one goal? Did we really have anything else of note?
Well, I thought it was, with good moments. I think it was a final ball that was letting us down. Sometimes the wrong options. I looked at the team and, people like Niall McGinn didn't offer an awful lot for me today.
Sure.
I thought McLennan was quite quiet. I wanted to see McLennan start the game.
Yeah.
I thought this would have been the sort of game that he would have really showcased his potential. I thought
it was something we discussed on our last episode. This would have been a game for Conor McLennan to really stamp his authority. He's been a player that's not seen many minutes. As I said in the last episode, probably not as many minutes as he would have liked. But he seemed to trudge off in the second half, very disappointed. But from what I saw in that second 45 minutes, I as a fan would have been very disappointed in his overall performance.
I don't think he can have any complaints. He didn't play well today. And this is my problem, Glenn, with McLennan. He has good games seldom, but he has a lot of mediocre to very poor games. And I don't know where Glass is wanting to play McLennan. Does he want to play him as an out-and-out wing-back? Does he want to play him as a more attacking forward? Does he want to play him more centrally? I don't know. The problem lies with that conundrum. But also McLennan's action needs to improve. I think his overall kind of authority in the game is very disappointing. He's got a very poor demeanour. I feel he's got to work on that. And I'm sure he's a really nice guy. I'm sure he's a really fine fella. But when I watch him in the pitch, I don't know what he offers sometimes. He really frustrates me as a player. Yeah,
no, 100% agree. But I suppose at half-time, 1-0 up in the cup competition, you've rested players. You think, this is going swimmingly well. I was on my way home thinking, how many jet puns can I fit into today's episode? Well, here's the first one. It wasn't a very turbulent second half, because we certainly hit a big bump in the road. And John McGlynn said in midweek that he hoped he would catch his Aberdeen team with the eyes off the ball, maybe distracted by that game on Thursday. I don't even think the game on Thursday was the distraction. I think Jack Gurr's concentration was left behind in the dressing room at the start of the second half, because you touched on about there at the start of the episode about what was maybe said at halftime from Stephen Glass or John McGlynn. But that is the biggest disaster for us to start that second half. And I suppose you can attribute it to like the Livingston game, almost the perfect time for a team to score when they're trailing at half-time, because you've got almost the whole second half to kick on.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think it was. I think John McGlynn highlighted that he knew that Aberdeen started second halves quite well. I listened to his actual post-match interview with Jane Lewis, and he said that he really wanted his side to come out at the start of the second half and just take the game to Aberdeen. And in fact, I've not actually seen it, but apparently Willie Miller thought that Jack Gurr should have given away the penalty, which led ironically to that equaliser. But I don't think it was a penalty.
No, I don't think it was a penalty either. But me and Calum have talked about this. It seems to be every episode so far this season. We're 7 games into the season. We've only kept 1 clean sheet. In fact, the only clean sheet we've actually kept under Stephen Glass in a competitive fixture. But once again, a sloppy, avoidable goal was the equaliser. And it's a sloppy, avoidable goal at the second, but again, we'll come on to that. But a player in Jack Gurr, who's maybe still learning his trade on the professional level, coming through the ranks at Atlanta, do you think that goal just showed his inexperience defensively?
It showed his naivety. I think that's a better word to use.
Yeah.
I think it was really poor defending. I thought it was just so clumsy. And one thing I want to say here, Glenn, I thought Regan Tumblety had an excellent game.
Absolutely agree.
I thought he was outstanding.
And also him and Dylan Tate, who obviously picked up the Man of the Match award at centre half alongside Christophe Berra. And I think for me that the fact that a Raith centre back was picking up the Man of the Match and how composed they looked defensively when we were trying to put pressure on the game, albeit the pressure wasn't very extensive, I felt, but it was quite stark, the contrast between their centre-half pairing and our centre-half pairing.
Absolutely agree. I think we're still trying to find the right blend, the right mixture in at the back. Glass is determined to make sure that McCrory is one of that centre backs. I don't think that's the right answer.
But how many times, again, we've touched on it this season already, we give the ball away cheaply. I could have probably counted on both hands how many times McCrory had stray pass or sloppy pass and giving the ball away that led to unnecessary pressure.
Yes.
And, Joe Lewis's goal was being rained down on with shots from distance, which was just something that we were, it seemed reluctant to do in the second half. We didn't want to. We seem to want to score the perfect goal. We want to walk it into the net at times. But, Jack McKenzie's done it this season. Lewis Ferguson's done it. If you don't shoot, you don't know what's going to come. We've had the luck with Jack McKenzie, but for some reason, we didn't want to see that today. And it's just so frustrating because the mistakes that have been happening have, you kind of excuse it if it happened once or twice, but to happen almost every game so far this season, what's going on at Cormack Park? Is it because we've got this run of games we're not having time to perfect it on the training ground? But I actually think these are individual errors. It's not, formation or tactics. Would you kind of agree on that, or?
I partly agree. I think it is definitely individual mistakes. I do think, though, one thing that was absolutely screaming out of the game today, Glenn, is the lack of leadership. You take Scott Brown at that team. Aberdeen, for me, lack an identity, they lack an understanding of how they want to play games. You could see what Brown offers the team. I'm not the biggest Scott Brown fan in the world, but Scott Brown, leadership, organisation, and just shouts. Joe Lewis comes back as captain today. There's your problem. Nothing against Joe Lewis.
That's
in the middle of the pitch to try and organise things. Why is the goalkeeper captain today?
Nah, that's harsh. You can't blame the defeat on.
No. I'm not blaming the defeat on Joe Lewis, but I'm saying we lack that bite, that determination, that authority in the middle of the pitch.
Yeah, but you've got.
You need some organisation there.
But then
gives you that.
Yeah, but you've got
gives you that.
Experienced midfielder, Dylan McGeoch, been there, done that. He should be stepping up to the plate. Funso Ojo, we know he's got a bit of a nasty side to him, if he wants. So where was that sort of leadership? You can't put it on Joe Lewis.
I wasn't putting it on Joe Lewis,
but you can't just say you need these players that are then on the pitch to then go and step up themselves. Declan Gallagher was a captain at Motherwell. Where's his leadership then? These sort of players. But again, why does it take Scott Brown coming on to inject that?
I'll give you the answer to that. Scott Brown has won things. The rest of that team have not. There's your answer.
Dylan McGeoch not won the Cup of Hibs? Did he not win the Scottish Cup of Hibs?
Well, but okay, that's one thing. Okay, I'll give McGeoch a bit of an investigation. But my point still stands. There's too many guys there that's shirking responsibility.
But could you argue that some of the responsibility was being shirked on the touchline by making those amount of changes? Because I saw the argument on social media that we should have gone with our strongest 11 for 60 minutes and then rested players.
I'm sort of halfway house with this. I would have definitely made some changes, but I wouldn't have made 8 changes. I would have maybe made 4 substitutions today. That would have been a good number. I still think, though, Glenn, you look at that team, and yes, okay, he's made changes, but I still think that team on page today should not have been losing that match. I really cannot believe that when Aberdeen get in front in the game, this is what makes it even more worse for me. Yeah. They get themselves in front in the game and lose it. I can understand a lot of fans' frustration as well if Raith had dominated the game and won the game 2-0.
Yeah, it's a good point. It's a point.
We had control in the game.
Yeah, it's a point Jonathan Main made on Twitter. Remember, you can follow us on Twitter at @RTG_podcast. He made that point that the defeat would kind of be more accepting if we were just shite throughout the game, not turn to shite in the second half. But, you spoke about leadership there. I'm looking at your experienced players in Niall McGinn. What did he offer today? Teddy Jenks, I know he's inexperienced. I'm yet to see what he's got to really offer in the Aberdeen top. What is his natural position? You know, I noticed in the second half he was playing a lot deeper. I thought he was a more kind of forward-minded midfielder. Ramirez came on in the second half. We needed a goal when he came on. Don't remember him touching the ball. Where was the service to him? Connor McLennan, pretty anonymous second half, running down alleyways. Ojo didn't really stamp any sort of authority into the game on the second half. McGeek was obviously trying to spread the ball, to spread the play. No drive going forward. But again, I suppose that harks back to the point you make about lack of leadership. But when you're bringing in experienced players like Niall McGinn, we need to see him step up.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Kind of seeing him come to the end of his time, maybe.
You kind of know what I'm going to say here. I think Niall McGinn has been a great servant to Aberdeen. I want to state that off the bat. I think Niall McGinn's been a really good player for Aberdeen for many, many years. But when we got him back second time round, I thought that was a backwards move from the club. And I still maintain him still being here is a backwards move by the club. And the same is kind of being reciprocated as well to Johnny Hayes. I mean, I really love Johnny Hayes. I think Johnny Hayes is a very fine guy. I've spoken to Johnny Hayes a couple of times when I met him on a night out. He's a really nice guy. McGinn as well. You know, they're very good guys. But, you know, there comes a stage in your career when you have to be, if you're not offering games, you have to look like you want it. And I don't think McGinn looks like he wants it anymore. He looks lost.
Yeah.
He looks short to me. I just want to go back to what you're saying about leadership. Go it the other way. You look at Raith today. You mentioned this about the back, but I thought Christoph Pera was outstanding today. Yeah. You know,
but even Dario Zanata up front as well, lively throughout. A player that I've always been impressed with whenever I've seen Raith on the TV and when BBC Scotland are showing the championship games. But it's just, again, it's desire. One team wanted that in the second half. And
absolutely.
What really frustrated me was, the way we speak about wanting to bring that silverware back to Pittodrie, the vision Stephen Glass and Cormac have got for the club. It was a question me and Calum went over. You posted on your Twitter as well, pre-match, about would you sacrifice this game ahead of the European game on Thursday if it meant that we got group stage football?
Yeah. Yeah, I must admit.
What I want to say to you now, though, we've lost this game now. How important is actually going and getting group stage football off the back of that, given how many players we rested, the level of performance we've put in? We need to see a bounce back.
Well, I think now we definitely need to see a bounce back, but also if we go into this game on Thursday night and Qarabag score 2 or 3 and we have no reply, then suddenly Stephen Glass looks a little bit of a numpty, in my opinion. People are going to be probably thinking the same. I think I'm just looking at a tweet here from Lee Mayer, former Aberdeen player, makes a really good point here. Strange one from Stephen Glass today. Brought to Aberdeen to win trophies and rest most of his team. Lucky to get away with it last week due to a goalkeeping howler in the last minute. Personally don't think they have a strong enough squad to challenge with the rest many players. And I actually agree with that.
Yeah, so let's look at that then, because defensively, you used the word naivety from Jack Gurr for the first. Well, I really don't know what word. Well, you're going to use a PC word, but I'm going to say it was fucking shite because he looks over his shoulder. So,
watching.
So my friend Keith texted me and said somebody should have been giving Jack Gurr a shout. Well, no, because it's fucking inexcusable when you look over your shoulder and know that there's a player there to dilly on the ball that much and then not even fucking win it. You're beaten to it, and fair play to Dario Zanata because he leathers that past Joe Lewis. Yeah. And the inquest then begins because Joe Lewis is going crazy. You've got your leader on the pitch in Scott Brown. He must be thinking, what the fuck am I playing with? And, Stephen Glass, he didn't waste much time because Jack Gurr didn't, last much longer. Now, Jack Gurr, I'm not pinning this all on him, but in the game against Breidablik in Iceland, there was a lot of coaching going on from the sidelines from Stephen Glass to Jack Gurr. Is it a case that he's might get found out? Now, we've spoken about this, me and Calum, about when we play higher quality of opposition again, no disrespect to Raith Rovers here, but if we're going to get caught out that easily against Raith, what hope does he have if he has to get drafted in against Rangers for say?
Very much so. It's definitely concerning. There's no question about that. I mean, I want to just touch on something in the build-up to that goal, because we spoke off air beforehand, and I think a lot of Aberdeen fans who watch us or listen to the podcast know that Aberdeen for many years have had a very consistent goalkeeper in Joe Lewis. This is just my personal opinion. I think Joe Lewis has to do better on the goal. He's pushed it straight back out into the 6-yard box. Gurr has to clear his lines. Hang on a minute. Gurr has to clear his lines. I absolutely get that. But Joe Lewis or worse should be pushing that behind for a goal.
Now, I agree to an extent, but the movement on the ball from a lot of the shots from distance, the ball was doing a lot of swerving. But given the amount of time and space that Jack Gurr found himself in, I really struggle to apportion any blame to Joe Lewis on that.
No, I agree, but I
see the point you're making, totally.
But I do think that it takes two to tango sometimes, and sometimes you could stop it at source. I mean, there was no closing down on the shot for a start as well.
True. Again, so which we saw in midweek. We didn't close down the shot. We conceded. Exactly. Don't close down the shot. Okay, we save it.
Goals like that. Yeah. Look at Celtic Park last year when we let David Turnbull race through and score.
Yeah,
it's terrible.
But again, we've seen it again. More shite goals conceded, more sloppy goals conceded, more avoidable goals conceded. We knew this season was going to be a roller coaster. Well, this is definitely the first bump in the road. Stephen Glass came out and said that he was happy with his defence. Michael Devlin's included in that defence. We've not seen him for God knows how long. Is he even fit enough? But surely he must even himself be looking at that today and going, that defence is not okay for the rest of the season.
No. I think Dave Cormack has to give...
Especially, sorry, before you answer, especially if we were to progress in Europe, because there's no way, we're going to come on to it in a second about the injuries that have been picked up. The squad isn't deep enough to cope with severe injuries. But our defence isn't good enough to keep the ball out of the net just now, let alone, deal with injuries.
I agree. And I think Dave Cormack now needs to understand that I think Stephen Glass needs more reinforcement, certainly needs two players. I still think we're missing a number 9 as well, Glenn. I still think that if Christian Ramirez or Emmanuel Thomas pick up an injury, we look massively short. I still think at centre-back, we look short. I've seen a lot of tweets saying that, Gallagher's not comfortable on the ball, McCrory's not great defensively. We're not getting the right balance in that defence. I think we've got two very good, exciting young full-backs in Ramsey and McKenzie. Obviously didn't play today. Ramsey came off the bench. But we look short in the centre of that defence. And, if you're short in there, you're in trouble. And even Andy Considine, and we all love Andy Considine, Aberdeen's Aberdeen club legend, but Andy Considine isn't going to be an Aberdeen player forever.
Again, he's also the player that's on the ageing side. Will these games coming thick and fast catch up with him as well? He's not blessed with bags of pace. Neither's a lot of our defence, especially when we give the ball away cheaply and they're caught out of position. But that's another story. But no, it was a point that Jonathan Main picked up as well about needing the backup number 9 in the questions that we asked to be submitted. And one of them was from Calum's brother, Adam, saying that Qarabag are probably rubbing their hands with excitement. Can we realistically expect to get anything from Thursday? They're currently winning their game, first league game of the season 1-0, just 18 minutes gone at the time of recording. So up and running already this season for them domestically. But Grant, we're going to be going into that game on Thursday without two key players. I know what you've just touched on there about Johnny Hayes, but he is a key player with his pace, I think especially in Europe. But the man who really helped get us there on Thursday night with 2 excellent goals, Ryan Hedges, looks like he's done his hamstring. Hedges in particular, that's a big blow.
That is a massive blow. I think he's...
Especially probably Dave Cormack's thinking, Oh, well, there was a chance of a lot of money coming in this summer.
Who knows? But yeah, completely agree, Glen. That's a massive blow. Yeah, I think Hedges was superb on Thursday night against Breidablik. I mean, he took his 2 goals very well, particularly the second goal. But his movement, he just offers something exciting when he gets on the ball. He's creative. He's got that bit of dynamism about him. Just offers something different that a lot of that Aberdeen team don't have. But in some respects, it's an opportunity for other guys to actually step up. And you look at that game today we've just talked about there. If they don't get a boot up the arse after today, then a lot of these players simply don't want to play for Glass, and that would be a bigger concern for me.
Okay, then. So who would you say, because Martin Stone says on Twitter that the Hedges injury is the biggest concern because it's likely that Funso Ojo will definitely start now.
Yes.
Probably in that role, the role that we saw him play against Hacken. Obviously missing that gilt edge chant. But when you look at players like Conor McLennan not performing consistently, Niall McGinn definitely hasn't shown that he deserves any stake in the starting 11 based on today. Are you agreeing with Martin that it will likely be Funso that takes Ryan's place in the team on Thursday night?
I think it probably has to be. I think probably what you're going to see is maybe a 4-5-1 on Thursday in Azerbaijan. You know, I think we'll be playing... I actually don't think Ramirez will start on Thursday night. I think Jet will play as the lone striker. I wouldn't be surprised if we flood the midfield. I wouldn't be surprised if Brown, Ferguson, McCrory are all in that team. I think we'll be playing to not lose the game. And I think maybe that's something that a lot of Aberdeen fans might not want me to hear me say. But actually, if it gives us more of a chance going into the second leg, then it might be the hit we have to take. Because I do think sometimes that we have a very exciting style of football that we can look forward to. But, you know, there's a lot of reasons why a lot of Aberdeen supporters admired what Derek McInnes did. You know, Derek McInnes made his teams very difficult to beat. Yes, they weren't pleasing on the eye. And yes, a lot of people were saying it wasn't the greatest brand of football, but it got results. And sometimes you need a bit of a mix of both strategies, Glass and McInnes' ideas. Sometimes it's a bit of a marriage of the both that really I think Aberdeen are needing at the moment. Now, I think Glass is doing a better job than I expected him to do at this stage. Today is a disappointing result and probably the first black mark against him in his tenure at the club, in my opinion.
I was going to say it's going to be a second black mark, but folk might think it's harsh because the Scottish Cup season, the Scottish Cup defeat to Dundee United for me.
Okay, I was meaning this season. Yes, no,
this season, yeah, but I suppose you could counter that Dundee United defeat, saying that it wasn't his team.
No, I agree.
So I'll let him off with that, but. Yeah,
you should get beat 3-0 by your bitter rivals in a cup competition. That's why I look at it.
You know, we went out in really poor fashion in the League Cup last season away to St Mirren. It's another away defeat again this season. So the first opportunity to win silverware is already down in the ditches. So, for those of you dancing in the streets of Raith tonight, I'm sure you're having the greatest time, and those opposition fans that are tuning into this episode, because I know we get a lot of you, Hibs, Rangers, I'm sure you've thoroughly enjoyed our dissection of a dismal day for the Dons.
We're still smiling though, aren't we, Glenn? We have to be sometimes.
We have to, yeah, because
it's the roller coaster of being Aberdeen supporters, isn't it?
It's the roller coaster that Stephen Glass is putting us on this season, and the next loop in that roller coaster comes on Thursday as the Dons travel to Baku, and joining us to preview the game on Thursday is Patrick Caskie. Oh, Patrick, thanks very much for joining us on Red Tinted Glasses today. Hope you're well.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm doing well and looking forward to what must be the first Scottish Azeri game since 2016. Yeah,
definitely. And what was it that sparked your interest in Azerbaijani football? Because it's not just them, it's that league, and is Turkey as well that you're a fan of?
Yeah, so I'm lucky enough. I mean, there's being in Aberdeen, the dynamic of oil is quite evident, and Baku and Aberdeen is not very popular, but there are quite a few Aberdonians who are in Baku, and I lived in Baku between 2015 and 20, between the ages of 12 and 17. I've been lucky enough to live in a few places because my parents are teachers at international schools. So I graduated there last year, and I now am back in Scotland. And I always like the idea of learning a bit about the culture through football. So I've been lucky enough to go to games, and the crossover into Turkish football is that in Azerbaijan, everyone has a Turkish team. The domestic sort of structure isn't too healthy. You'll get lots of fans at the European games, but as a little anecdote, I remember going to the 2016 Azeri FA Cup final, and there was 200 fans in the 34,000 seater stadium. Yeah, so it's not very healthy. So everyone, you'll see far more Fenerbahce, Galatasaray, and Beşiktaş flags than you will see Qarabag or Neftchi. So that's kind of why I'm interested. And especially with the lockdown, there was plenty of time to watch as much football as I wanted.
Yeah, no, it's good to have you on the show today, and obviously we know that Qarabag are currently in action. And obviously you mentioned before recording that is it Zina that they're playing. Just give us a little side note what you were saying about them being the third best team in Azerbaijan that the Qarabag are up against. Yeah,
historically not, but they were the third best team last season, and they kind of mounted a somewhat legitimate title challenge until perhaps January, and then they fell off, and they were kind of comfortably third place. So if there's any, obviously they're not going to play Neftchi in the first game of the season, and this is their first league game.
Yeah,
Zira is probably an interesting idea of a team to watch, and sort of obviously not nowhere near Aberdeen's level, probably more similar Zira to a Ross County or a Dundee or a Livingston, but it's outside of Neftchi the best test they can have, and it'll be interesting to see how they play in sort of a stylistic thing, because there's been squad turnover, plenty of squad turnover this summer.
Yeah,
Patrick, Qarabag 7-year domination of the Premier League in Azerbaijan was ended last season by Neftchi Baku. They also lost their top scorer, Mari Emreli, I think is how you pronounce him, in the summer. Is Qarabag in transition at the moment? Where do you see them sitting right now?
Despite losing the league last season, they probably still were the best team. I know it seems like an oxymoron if they're not the champions, but to give it a sort of representation is earlier in the season they beat Neftchi 6-0, and I don't think you'll ever see a league in which the team who wins it and the team in second loses 6-0. And I think the unexpected points, Neftchi should have been ahead by 18 points or something. No, Qarabag rather. So Qarabag were clearly the best. But I think if they haven't been in transition in the last 2 years, they certainly are now. They've had this sort of pretty clear core of players since 2014. And since then, many have left. And I think Emreli is probably the best example. He was sort of the crown in the sort of Qarabag armory. He was the best player. He was a top scorer. He was dynamic. He was everything Azerbaijan wanted in a star, but he's a bit of a prodigal son. He's a bit annoying for a lot of people. He fails to deliver, but he has been sort of quintessential to their ability to perform as well. 2 years ago or three, their captain, Rashid Sadi, got retired. They lost Michel, who was very key in every European run. He was sort of, right now, the way their team is constructed, they have quite a few good attacking midfielders who are quite dynamic, but he was the one alongside Garagayev, who's still there, who would sort of bring the steel, which is needed when you're playing against technically superior teams. I think the best example is the 2 draws away to Atletico Madrid, or the Slovan Liberec 2 ties in 2006 in Europa League. But yeah, they are in transition, and they'll continue to transition even further in the next few years because their backline's aging. Maxim Medvedev, who's been there for must be close to 7 or 8 years, is 34. Badavi Husseinov's 30. So Azerbaijani football seems to be on a downwards trend compared to the sort of the heights Qarabag have reached in the last 4 or 5 years. And I think, if anything, this might represent the last time in which they're serious favourites in this sort of nature. When they entered Europe this year, they were favoured to make the group stages, obviously before they saw the draws. And I think next year they're probably going to go in thinking without a clear plan of getting to the group stages. But the idea of playing Aberdeen is quite difficult compared to what they might have expected in like a Drita or other sort of teams around. You see the other teams playing Icelandic, Macedonian, there's a few Kosovan teams, but this will be a difficult tie for them.
And a side note to that, Patrick, how much of that Azerbaijan international team do Qarabag have of an influence? Is there a lot of Qarabag players that are involved in the international team with Azerbaijan?
Yeah, so there's a few. There's a pretty established starting 11, and I think there's 4 or 5 who play in the Azeri League. There's obviously a few who play in Russia. There's now a few who play in Turkey. If one left yesterday to join Bursaspor. But yeah, Badavi Husseinov, Garagarayev. I'm not even going to try and pronounce the goalie's name, but it's something along the lines like Sulahin, and it's Medevelidiev or something like that. Yeah,
I look forward to John Meadows pronouncing that on Thursday night, a week on Thursday.
They're all pretty pivotal, but it's probably half Azeri Premier League and half international players, and 2 or 3 are from FG, 2 or 3 from Qarabag.
Yeah, I mean, obviously they dominated the Premier League for a long time, only losing the league on the last day of the season last year, and I think it was a 90th minute winner for an FG, so almost in the palm of their hands right up until the end. But they're the most successful Azerbaijani team in Europe. What would you attribute to that success?
They're without doubt sort of the best managed team. Neftchi have been a bit of a shambles right now, boardroom-wise. They have the backing of Azersun. They're not financial behemoths by any point, but Azersun are quite a large conglomerate. And if you're ever in Baku, they're posted on a lot of things. I don't even know exactly what they do, but I just know I see them a lot. Also, they've sort of been lucky that Gabula, who are a team from the north of Azerbaijan, they sort of threatened for a few years. They got Europa League group stages in 2014-15. Okay. Tottenham came to Baku, Dortmund came to Baku, but they had that 3-year window in which they sort of properly threatened Qarabag, and now, for whatever reason, they find themselves in 8th, 9th position. So there's Qarabag. It's a multiplicity of Qarabag being good, but also a lack of a serious challenger. Whereas you'd hope Neftchi can now for the health of the game, but they've also lost their striker, they've also lost their star centre back, so it doesn't seem like Azeri football's in a health position, but it does seem that Qarabag will continue to be the best team.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Qarabag are still currently managed by Gurbanov, is that correct, Patrick? And he's been there since 2008. Give us a little bit of an idea as to what he gives Azerbaijan, and also maybe the kind of interesting results that they've had in the past, because they've been in some really interesting matches. They've been in the Champions League before. They've had some pretty good results.
Yeah, I mean, he's as close as you can get to a post-Soviet Azeri football legend. There was a few during the Soviet times who were really famous, but Gurbanov, as well as the aforementioned Rashid Sadigov, are kind of like the 2 sort of hard men, loved, idolized in Azerbaijan, because he's been there for a while and he's sort of overseen the total transformation. Because before this 7-8 in a row charge, Qarabag were not a team who were successful. Obviously, I'm sure you're aware of the sort of geographical situation. They play in Baku, but they're not from Baku, sort of thing. So he's kind of made them a serious team. And I've been lucky enough to be at a few of the Champions League games they've played at, a few of the Europa League games. But he sets his team up to be quite pragmatic and dogged. Historically has been a mix of sort of fighters and then a few with technical ability. This is more obvious in the Champions League because they would always set up to be sort of the team who'd go on the counter, because in their mind they know they stand no chance playing against when they had Roma, Chelsea and Atletico. But similarly in the Europa League, and interestingly, almost all their best games, their sort of pinnacles of success, have been low-scoring games. It was 2-1-1s, or it was a 1-1 and a 0-0 against Atletico Madrid. It was a 1-1 against Slovan Liberec. It was a 2-1 against Fiorentina. So if they do well, it's not at the sort of behest of their attacking football. It's keeping the other team out and then trying to be annoying and get on the break, get lucky, get a finish. So I'm not sure if that will probably be the same way of the dynamic of the Aberdeen game, just because, to do no disrespect to Aberdeen, they're not the sort of team in which Qarabag need to sit back completely, but they do they provide a interesting proposition, and one that Qarabag will have to respect most definitely.
Yeah, and Stephen Glass, obviously we're touching on there about Qarabag being in a team in transition. I suppose on the other hand, Aberdeen are as well, with Stephen Glass in his first full season in charge, bringing in players and still probably finding his feet defensively. We know we've spoken today about obviously the defeat to Raith. It's not been fully defensively sound. But going forward, we have attacking threats that can hopefully exploit Qarabag. Unfortunately, Ryan Hedges looks to have picked up a serious hamstring injury. But how has Gurbanov got the best out of his team in Europe? Is it just playing to the opposition? Because there's been when I was researching him on Wikipedia, it says he likes to play a like tiki-taka football. Maybe is it similar to Barcelona? Is that a bit over the top?
A bit over the top, sure, and that's probably a better representation of how they play in Azerbaijan and in the early legs of the European games. But in sort of the Champions League or in the Europa League, when they do well, they sit narrow. They force a team to sort of beat them. And I assume, as I mentioned earlier, I don't know if that dynamic will reflect the Aberdeen game, but they do have some players who are capable of playing some attractive football. And they do play quite vertically. They usually play 4-2-3-1, but they're not too sort of set on one formation. But they don't really play very horizontally because they're not the quickest team. But they'll play with sort of a narrow attacking midfielders off the back of a striker, and they'll look to play 1-2s. And there's a lack of long balls. It's quite short, to be fair. So the Barcelona tiki-taka comparison, though a bit romantic, is somewhat true, I guess. But so I would expect overloads on sort of centre-backs and defensive mids if I was from Aberdeen, because they'll sort of look to keep the space between the striker and the attacking mid for Qarabag quite short, just to let them do some small trickery. But I might expect it to be, I don't know if the pitch will allow it. The Tawfiq Baramov Stadium looks like a potato field. That's how it was described in the Azeri media. And it's only going to get worse because it's been really hot in Azerbaijan. I think it was 36 or something today. My parents who were still in Baku were telling me.
There's also been talk that the game actually might get moved because of the state of the pitch. So hopefully that is the case. Yeah,
the other stadiums, the Azersun Arena, it's smaller, which is probably better in every single aspect for Qarabag, because they're not going to fill a stadium of 34,000, but they would fill out the 12 or so thousand the Azersun has, which would make it a louder atmosphere. And
what about the one that was used in the Euros? Would that be available? Or
it might be. The only time they've ever used the Olympic Stadium is for those 3 Champions League group games, and then the home leg against Arsenal in the 2018-19 Europa League. That would also be more expensive to rent, and it would perhaps, like an image-wise, would look quite pathetic when there's like 5,000-10,000 people in a 60,000 seater. But I think if it's anything, they would probably revert to the Azersun if they are forced to.
Do you think Aberdeen would get a say in the movement of it to the Olympic Stadium compared to the Azersun, or would Qarabag be the ones that have that decision?
I would think it'd be Qarabag. I think Gurbanov told Idman TV that the pitch being bad is a reflection of both teams. Both teams are going to have to judge, play with the bad pitch. So I don't think he's going to give Aberdeen any insight into where they're going to play, but because it's the same pitch for both teams. So he seems to maybe almost resign to the fact they're going to play there already.
Yeah, and Grant, sorry, just before you ask the next question, I suppose what Patrick's discussed there about the movement kind of goes back to what we've just discussed in the review of the Raith game, where you said, maybe we will look to flood the midfield on Thursday night. But what Patrick touches on there about maybe the quick movement that Qarabag could offer off the striker, maybe will worry some Aberdeen fans listening or watching in. Do you think?
Well, potentially. I don't know.
Just given what we've seen defensively today.
Well, certainly today is concerning. But, I think, maybe going man for man might be something that Glass thinks is maybe a better option. Judging what Patrick said there, it sounds like the Qarabag got some quite stylish players, even though they do play a certain style. So, yeah, that could be something that might happen. But I don't know. I think, as I said earlier in the show, Aberdeen need to have a game plan to go over to Qarabag to stay in the tie, to take it back to Pittodrie for the second leg. Because if they don't play well, like we saw today against Raith, we're going to be in big trouble.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the questions I wanted to ask was just a sort of going back to the pitch thing, Patrick. We saw problems with some of the pitches at the Euros, didn't we? I think Bilbao had a particularly poor surface, didn't they? I mean, obviously the heat is a big factor there. I mean, you mentioned earlier on that both teams will have problems, but you know and I know that the home team will have experienced this much more consistently than the away team. So Qarabag might have an advantage on that.
Yeah, most definitely. The heat does get quite bad, but I'm assuming they're going to play at nightfall, so it should drop down to late 20s, which still seems quite difficult for Scottish teams. But
it'll be quite humid. as well?
Yeah, it's quite. I mean, it's on the sea. It'll be very windy. It could be at least. Dinamo Tbilisi played Neftchi in the first Champions League round, and the corner flags. It was so windy they were taken out of their place twice in the game. So it could be very windy. Baku's. There's some transliteration in his area. It's called like the Windy City or something. But it will be hot. But it won't be unbearable since it'll be nightfall. I know it's no comparison, but I've played quite many football matches in Baku, and it's bad, but it's not terrible. It's not like you're playing in the Arabian Gulf or anything, but it could be quite uncomfortable. But these are professional footballers. They're fit. They're top level in terms of physique, and they've just come off I'm assuming, a good preseason. So they're not going to have the sort of December sort of cathartic fatigue. So it'll be difficult, but it shouldn't be a decisive factor. It could be overestimated, but I think the nature of the tie, second leg in Aberdeen, does help a lot, because you could say in the dying embers of the game, or in the second leg, if it was in a boiling Baku, would be conducive to the idea of Qarabag winning late as opposed to Aberdeen. So the idea in which the second home leg is for Aberdeen, if my sort of what's good for Scotland is good, the sort of hat is pleasing.
Let's hope it's really cold at Pittodrie in a couple of
years,
because that might help Aberdeen, I think. But one of the things that really intrigues me, Patrick, is that this isn't the first British game that Qarabag have played. They've played Arsenal in the past, as you mentioned there. They played Celtic. But I want to ask you particularly about Linfield, because I'm a big fan of Northern Irish football. Linfield came so close to beating Qarabag a couple of years ago. They led 3-2 at Windsor Park. They lost the return game 2-1, going out on away goals. What did you make of Linfield in that game? And can Aberdeen look at that game and maybe take some advantage of what Linfield tried in the game to get at that Qarabag defence?
Yeah, that was quite a weird result. It was probably the first sign of some cracks in their, at least European armour, because they're typically they do well in the qualifications. I mean, you'll need to look back at 3 or 4 years ago when they brushed it past Copenhagen. So it's a serious drop off. Do all respect. I like to watch Northern Irish football. It was good to see Larne doing well in the qualifications, but the idea in which Linfield come and give a proper test, and even in the way the game was constructed, if it was played this year, it would go to extra time. But that was weird because they played them. They were poor against Upwell that year in the game before going out of the Champions League.
Yeah.
So that was just that was the first sort of cracks or visual sort of cracks in the European sense. And I think it probably won't be as high scoring as that, even though Aberdeen seem to be, at least on what I've watched, up for it in an attacking sense. Christian Ramirez has started well. I would be surprised if we see anything close to 5 or 4 goals. I think we might see, if we're lucky, 4 goals combined over the 2 legs, or maybe unlucky, because I think it'll suit Aberdeen if it's a low scoring game. Yeah,
well, we've had 8 goals in the over the legs so far from Aberdeen, so definitely be a contrast if it's a low scoring tie this time around.
I mean, just a quick one to Glen, because, one of the things that I got my attention from that Linfield game, particularly the game at Windsor Park, was that Qarabag seemed to struggle with pace in the team. Shade Lavery that night, now at Blackpool, really came of age that night, scored a couple of really good goals, particularly the third goal. Yeah. Obviously, we've talked about Ryan Hedges, potentially being out of the tie. Could that lack of pace, maybe that Aberdeen have, potentially without Hedges, be a big factor? Could that be costly for us?
Well, I would look at Conor McLennan in terms of his pace. We know that maybe his finishing and the rest of his game still needs to catch up, but he's certainly got pace to get in behind. We saw that in effect in Iceland. But Funso Ojo as well, again, another player that we've spoke on, he seems to have got bags of pace this season, a player reborn, but again, maybe lacks the quality in the final third that Ryan Hedges offers. And I think for an Aberdeen point of view, we're going to have to be very clinical against this Qarabag team, because Patrick, I don't know if you can maybe give us a more insight into that, but we might not be able to create too many chances, and when they come about, we should be making sure we take these chances.
Yeah, I think it's quite a shame that Hedges won't be available, but I mean, Calvin Ramsey's looked pretty exciting so far, and he looks quite quick. So if you can somehow, it'll be quite difficult to get your fullbacks that high against a team in which it's probably a 50-50 sort of game. But the Qarabag, you'll get chances, no doubt, especially if, I mean, you mentioned Conor McLennan's quite quick. Kevin Medina and Badavi Husseinov are big big men, but they're not quick. They're decent. Husseinov especially is decent on the ball, but these are guys who, if they play any sort of semblance of a high line, Aberdeen should just be running, sending men and just trying to play long balls. But
yeah, so do you think it would be more better playing balls over the top instead of trying to play through Qarabag?
Yeah, I think so, because Gariev is quite a good midfield battler. He's good at tackling. Alongside him might be Filipovic or Jaime Romero, who are both more attacking, but they still provide, if you have a man in front, you still have to beat them. Yeah. But I think it's really dependent on how high a line Qarabag play as well, and also how fit your players are. I think maybe if you sort of sit in for the first half an hour and then look to it and allow Qarabag maybe to take the sort of impetus in the first half, hoping that they tire out, and then in the second half then hit them, that might be a good idea, because you're going over to Baku with the idea of winning would be perfect, but getting a draw, I think the first half of the first leg will really reflect the dynamic of the tie going forward. And I think you would definitely take a 1-1 or a 0-0 going to Azerbaijan, maybe even a 1-0 loss or something.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I've even said, if we were to come away with a defeat, as long as it's by a 1-goal deficit, because you take it to Pittodrie, hopefully the price is right at Pittodrie, and a full house can maybe help influence the second leg as well. But we saw Qarabag score late, very late in Cyprus, which caused a bit of some riotous scenes in the stands in Limassol, but also a late goal over in Baku. So we need to counter the fact that Qarabag never give up either. They're going to fight till the very last minute as well. Yeah,
especially with the dynamic that with a small country like Azerbaijan, fiercely patriotic, they're not only representing their club, they kind of represent the country in a way. And especially with that dynamics of what's happened in the last year, sort of with the second Nagorno-Karabakh war, even though there's obviously no comparison in Scotland, but there will be an extra edge in which they play with. But the nature of them scoring late is probably just breaking down of other teams, because they, against at least both legs against Ashdod, they look quite toothless, and they just struck well. I mean, Kadi, Borges, his nickname's Kadi, his goal in the home leg against Limassol was, maybe bad. Strike. It was a good strike, but maybe it's bad keeping because the keeper's off to the right side. But then it's a good strike. But it's you don't manage for that. That's a bit of ingenuity you can't really game plan for. But I wouldn't say there's anything sort of in the nature of them being super dogged and hardworking that's out with what you experience in Scotland, which is a league which is sort of characteristic by its hardworking, like older players going in, hard tackles, big guys, especially Qarabag strikers. Ramil Shadiev is quite a unit. He's really inconsistent, but I was talking to my brother and saying there's probably no team better prepared to play against a big, annoying striker than Aberdeen, because they will have to face Curtis Main and Sam Cosgrove in training for the last 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, well, even Declan Gallagher, who did well against Filip Mitrovic for Scotland on that famous night in Belgrade. He's an annoying striker, and Declan Gallagher had him back pocketed. So hopefully he can find that form from that night in Belgrade as well.
Yeah, Qarabag's so good defensively in their league last season. I was just looking at their stats here, just 18 goals conceded in the 28 games. Aberdeen have looked quite shaky defensively. Glen and I touched this in the first part of the show. Just kept one clean sheet this season under Stephen Glass. Could Qarabag target that Aberdeen defence in this game?
It will be interesting to see how they play this, especially with them being home at first, if they go all guns blazing and try and sort of get rid of the tie in the first leg, which I think would probably be the wrong way to play. It'd be an underestimation of Aberdeen, despite they might look quite shaky at the back. But I think just the nature of the tie, Qarabag's 2 previous legs were against teams of sort of similar quality, Ashdod and Limassol, all around that sort of tier in which Aberdeen probably can find themselves in. Yeah, and they didn't really go out and try and kill the game early, even though Ashdod looked like a very, very poor team defensively and in possession. So I wouldn't be surprised if they just play the game on its merits, see what happens and sort of go with the flow, as opposed to an idea in which let's try and kill the game in the first half or target this guy or this guy, because it is quite difficult, especially with there's a little barometer to compare with in Azerbaijan, because they won't have faced, even if Hedges is out, there's few players in an attacking sense who could probably come close to starting for Aberdeen in Azerbaijan. So it'll be quite interesting.
We've mentioned a lot of good players there. You mentioned there Ozovic, Zuber, who used to be at Hibs, Husianov as well. But, I mentioned earlier on about some of the connections with the Azerbaijani international team. We're actually recording this live. They're 1-0 up against Zira. Ibrahimli has scored the goal in that match. What can you tell us about him? Is he going to be a factor in this tie? Could he be a danger one to look out for? And can you name any others that might be a problem for Aberdeen? Keep an eye on.
Yeah. So Ismaili Ibrahimli is a sort of like a 10-8. He's an attacking midfielder. He played 25 games last season for Qarabag. I think he got 6 assists. He's quite good on the ball, quite neat in possession. He's sort of player who, just in nature of his game, he isn't set up to be a game winner, but if he's ticking well, Qarabag are playing well. Mm-hmm. But perhaps the one sort of wild card to look at is the 19-year-old winger Turel Bayramov. He is sort of the hype in Azerbaijan as the next big thing. Him and Sabui Abuladze, who plays for Sumgayit. But he got 4 goals and 5 assists last season. He's quite quick. He can play wing back or as a winger. So he's the sort of player on his day could win them a game, especially because Emreli's left and he was really the big game player alongside Filip Ozovic. But beyond Ozovic and Zubir are sort of like, if I don't like the term, but it's probably only the best way to put it, are like the magicians of the team. They're tricky. They play nice balls. They're good at shooting, good at dribbling, dynamic. They're sort of players who win games, will win a close game in Europe for you. But beyond them, I would look for Turel Bayramov. Beyond maybe just because I think he will be very good in the future, just be sort of as a marker to see what he's like. Because I think he is probably good enough in the next few years to play on TV screens we'll see in the UK.
Yeah, and obviously I'm glad I left all the pronunciations to Grant to do because I'd have definitely butchered them. But Zubier's, fans of Scottish football might, as Grant says, recognise from Hibs. He obviously got the vital equaliser over in Limassol. But there was the player that you mentioned in the centre of midfield. How important do you think that battle up against Scott Brown will be for the tie as a whole?
Yeah, I think if there was ever a tie in which is probably good for the idea of what Scott Brown will give you, it's this, a European playoff he's had previous in Azerbaijan with
of course, yeah.
In 2016. He's a battler. He won't give up. And he's also probably just has the edge. Azeri people, and especially Azeri footballers, as I've come to know playing there, are very competitive and prima donnas almost often. At least at the school level, which I've played at, very aggressive, very into it, 100 miles an hour, everything, scream at the ref sort of stuff. So I think Scott Brown could almost match that, the intensity that they'll bring, because they will bring an intensity which is perhaps like only seen in like Turkey and Azerbaijan. Yeah. So Scott Brown, if anyone in this team, will sort of remind the players, probably help Lewis Ferguson as well, even though he's played a lot, but he's someone who, at least what I've seen of Aberdeen, can be quite rash. But I think Scott Brown will be a good leveller for the whole squad, and Declan Gallagher as well, a guy who's handled pressure beyond this tie.
Yeah, so do you think in a way, obviously you mentioned the words prima donna, do you think there might be a case of we see them fall over quite easily under close contact and it maybe turn into a bit of a scrappy game, especially over there?
I'd expect a scrap. They're good game players. They know when to go down. It's a lot of the players, especially the way it's constructed, are flair players. You look at Patrick Andrade, you look at Kadi, you look at Ozovic and Zubir. They're flair players and they know when to go down. They're experienced, especially Ozovic and Zubir. So I wouldn't be surprised if this sort of becomes a very scrappy affair, especially in the second leg in Scotland, depending on the dynamics of the tie after the game in Baku.
Yeah, and it'll certainly be interesting to see how the game progresses, and even Medina, the Colombian defender as well, a very experienced player there in the centre of defence, see if we can get the better of him. Obviously, we've touched on there that the league season starting this weekend. Have goals been a problem for Qarabag since the departure of their top goal scorer, squeezing through the ties so far in Europe? I don't know if that's maybe harsh to say, but do you think they might struggle for goals this season?
I don't think in Azerbaijan will be a problem, but I think your reflection is quite fair of the 2 legs prior. They lost Emreli, but also Kwabena Owusu, who's on loan to Ankara Gucu now. And the only way I can describe this is if Rangers were to lose Ryan Kent and Alfredo Morelos in terms of a serious lack of goals out with, because those are the guys who give the numbers to Qarabag, but they're also the ones who create something out of nothing.
I suppose even Michel as well, 30 goals as well, losing him from midfield.
he provided a good steady stream of goals from midfield as well. But these two guys are the sort of backs against the wall. You need a goal, you'll throw them in there to do something. And Shadiev can do that, but he is incredibly inconsistent in what I've seen of him. Last year for Sabah in the Azeri League, he got 6 goals in 25. But then when he was in Russia and Turkey, and especially in Slovenia, he played really well. So you're not sure what you'll get on the day. And if he plays well, I think Declan Gallagher is perhaps the best equipped to deal with him. It's a good matchup for them. But I think depending, obviously you mentioned Aberdeen's defensive frailties. So a toothless attack mixed with a team who's not defending well will either come out one of two ways. We'll see lots of goals or no goals, because someone will sort of regress.
Something's got to give.
Well. So something's got to give. But I would put my money on this being quite low scoring. I think just what I expect of Aberdeen is to go there and to Baku and try and keep them in the tie. Yeah,
and Grant, I suppose when we knew that we were going to be going through to face Qarabag, there was an expectation from the Aberdeen fans that this would be a step up from the 2 rounds previous. And I suppose that view will be reciprocated over in Azerbaijan as well.
Yeah, I think so. And I think Aberdeen fans would agree with me that if Aberdeen want to be progressing in Europe and getting into the group stages of the Europa Conference League or any European group stage format for that matter, these are the sort of teams they need to be winning. As Patrick's alluded to there, Qarabag are a workmanlike team, but they're also a streetwise team. And Aberdeen have got to box clever in many respects. They have to, be wary of maybe the dark arts being used, maybe kind of subtle moments of play that might be their undoing over in Baku, particularly with the heat, as we talked about earlier on. I don't know what kind of temperatures will be there, Patrick. I'm talking maybe high 30s, low 40s, perhaps?
In the day, it might be like that, but in the last 2 games have been played at night, so I would assume at max it would be low 30s. But
it's a 5 o'clock kickoff here in the UK, which I assume is what?
8 p.m. 8 p.m. in Baku, so it will definitely get colder as it goes on, but I would be very surprised if it's anything above 35 degrees. But I would check your weather apps. I'm no oracle.
It's the humidity that's the big factor as well, though. I'm sure the humidity would be a big factor, because obviously we've seen, as you mentioned there during the day, obviously other sports have been taking place in Baku, obviously Formula 1 being a good example of that. And we've seen there that the heat can be a problem. Yes, it's during the day, but it's always also very interesting to see that dynamics throughout day to night, and that might be interesting.
Yeah, I would assume we'll see water breaks as well, which might throw a tactical sort of period timeout for Glass to sort, which might be nice, especially because Aberdeen will be facing a team which is a step up compared to the last 2 legs. So that interval at each quarter, I guess, will be probably good for Glass, for him to sort of set a stage, change if something's going wrong, encourage the guys. But it will be windy, I assume, as I mentioned earlier, so that might throw some out for set piece wise, or it might help them. A ball might be played short or not enough on it, and it'll be pushed through the Qarabag defenders and they play high, and then someone can run after it. But I think the environment will obviously play a factor, because I mean climactically you probably can't find 2 more apart places than Baku and Aberdeen, but I think in general it'll be an angle which is probably over exaggerated. They're all professional footballers. They've all been to pre-seasons or winter breaks in Spain. They've played in hot, even in the UK when it gets really hot, it is undeceivably hot. So I think it will play a factor, but these are professional footballers. I don't think this will decide the tie.
Yeah, and Patrick, we're viewing it from an Aberdeen point of view as a step up in class. Do you think that's being perceived the same in Azerbaijan, that Qarabag are viewing us as a step up in class from Limassol?
There hasn't actually been much about it. It's just the nature of what I get on following Azeri stuff. There hasn't been much talk about it, but I would assume they see it as a minor step up. Limassol are quite decent. They're there and about in European qualifiers for quite a while. Yeah. But I mean, just by the nature that they're in the Conference League and they're not in the Champions League qualifiers, I think they can't take anyone. They have to play them on their merits. They need to play them on their merits. And there's like an overwhelming sort of pessimism after the loss of Emreli, some poor performances. You need not only look to the Qarabag Twitter comments and just translate them. And there's some frustration, but then a lot of positive comments as well. But I think they see this as a difficult tie, but one that they think they'll be favourites in. But I'm perhaps don't corroborate that view.
Yeah, no, it'll be definitely interesting. And for those of you that follow us on Twitter, you'll have seen Patrick did an excellent thread on some of the dangers that Qarabag possess. We did give that a retweet on Thursday night at full time. We'll give that another movement the beginning of this week. But Patrick, where can people follow you on social media?
Yeah, so my Twitter's just at Caskie Patrick. If you like to follow, I'm not sure so many people want to see a lot of Rangers stuff on their timeline, but if you don't mind, there'll be some Rangers, there'll be some Turkish football as well, which I would heavily advise all of you to start watching. It's the only way to describe it is the WWE of football, but it's also good quality. But yeah, and just general football, I tweet about cricket and basketball a lot as well.
Yeah, no, perfect. And then just a final point then, what, you said you might not corroborate the confidence maybe of some from Qarabag. Do you think that Aberdeen will have enough over 2 legs to progress to the group stages?
I mean, I certainly hope so. I totally understand the point of view of Aberdeen fans wanting to be modest and respectful, just in the idea not to get your hopes up, just then not to qualify. I completely understand if someone thinks that Aberdeen go into this as underdogs almost, but I think it's a 55-45 in Aberdeen's favour. And I think if you get the sort of dynamics of the Hacken leg and you play that well, I think there's frankly little Qarabag can do to stop it. But in vice versa, if Qarabag show the form and the sort of European nous that they have, which is their one overriding factor in which they have, which Aberdeen doesn't have, then they'll make it more difficult. But I think the better footballing team is Aberdeen. But the team who might be better equipped to qualify for Europe is Qarabag. But if I was forced to bet on a score prediction, I would hope to see a 2-1 Aberdeen over the 2 legs.
And then Grant, I suppose it's going to be the hope that kills us, and maybe folk that are tuned into this episode. And if you have liked what you've heard and you've been watching on YouTube, make sure to like the video and hit that subscribe button, or follow wherever you've been listening in. Maybe, Grant, people will start to be encouraged and get some hope that we could see Aberdeen in the group stages for the first time since Jimmy Calderwood's time in charge.
I really hope so. I mean, it would be a big foothold on the Scottish football coefficient ladder, because for too long Celtic and Rangers have been flying the flag for Scottish football on the European stage. It's time that more clubs ourselves are in a good position to try and do that. There's also St Johnstone as well. Hopefully we can get all 4 teams into some form of European competition, at least up till Christmas, because that would be helpful. Interesting that Patrick thinks that Aberdeen are 55-45 slight favourites. I actually flip it the other way. I actually think Qarabag are the slight favourites because of that European nous. And we talked about some of the teams that they have beaten in the past, and they're a dogged team. They're a well-drilled side. I wouldn't be surprised if it's very close and it's only 1 goal over the 2 legs. I think there'll be a 0-0 in there somewhere. I just have a feeling that there'll be a 0-0 somewhere. In fact, I would not be surprised if we go to extra time over the 2 legs, and I really, really hope we can do it from Aberdeen, because we've had so much heartbreak over the years. Getting Aberdeen fans, Glen. I think it's high time we got some form of good fortune.
But no, I totally agree, and I think the experience that Qarabag have as a whole could prove pivotal, but this is also the reason why we signed Scott Brown for these games, and it's his experience that we'll need, and his leadership in that midfield that hopefully can see us through, because it's Scotland's most successful team in Europe versus the most successful team in Europe from Azerbaijan. It's the oil derby. See what you want to look like. But Patrick, it's been a pleasure to speak with you on all things Azerbaijani football and Qarabag in particular. Thanks very much for taking the time on joining us on Red Tinted Glasses.
Thanks very much, Patrick.
Thank you. Hopefully I'm a good omen and we see 3 or 4 teams from Scotland in European competition.
Yeah, definitely. And Grant, as well, to you, thanks for filling in Calum's absence today.
I'm the Matt Ashton of Red Tinted Glasses. I only fill in when people are ill or things like that. I'm like Maxi stands in for Alan Brazil on TalkSport. So I hope that's maybe not a great analogy, but there we go.
No, but pleasure as always to have you on the show, and both of you for joining us. And we'll be back on Friday with a review of the first leg. Hopefully more positive than today after the cup defeat, but with hopefully the tie still finally poised. And thanks for listening.